State lawmakers are just days away from the end of the special session with a lot of work ahead, but there's still a push to get action on one bill that's not on the call. How a decision by lawmakers last session is hitting some Texas children and the effort now to fix the damage. The bathroom bill has not moved forward in the Texas House, as some point to possible dangers the bill could bring.
It sends a message to transgender young people that they are not worthy of respect and that they can be discriminated against.
Find out how that debate is raising new mental health concerns. And paying tribute to a Texas governor, how Texans are remembering Mark White and his lasting legacy in the Lone Star State. Good morning and thank you for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. This week, lawmakers continue to work on 20 issues for which Governor Greg Abbott called them back to Austin for a special legislative session. However, child advocates want something more. They worry Texas will have more disabled adults in the years ahead if lawmakers don't take some action now to get much needed therapy to children. KXAN's political reporter Phil Prazen takes an in-depth look.
Let's stand up again. It's big.
Any parent knows you can't plan for everything.
Big steps, big steps.
Erica Rushing didn't plan for Reed, child number 5.
A big surprise. We weren't expecting another one.
And they didn't plan for Down syndrome.
A lot of people decide not to have these kids. And so you're given fear and anxiety.
Let's go.
Reed started physical therapy with Amanda Perez when he was 2 months old, teaching him how to do what came so quickly for his siblings.
We had to go flip those light switches and say, oh, this has to be physically flipped on where all your other kids naturally did these things.
With consistency, it worked.
And to see his little light switch flip on, like, oh, okay. And then he was rolling over and sitting up.
But then came something this Hays County family didn't plan for.
There are over 60,000 children that will be affected from these cuts.
The state of Texas helps pay for Reed's therapy. But 2 years ago, state lawmakers decided they were paying too much compared to other states. They cut payments by more than $300 million. Families worried they'd be forced to leave Texas to find care. Therapy providers said rural areas would be hit first. Areas like Reed's, where the cuts brought bad news.
This was not an easy decision for anybody within Hill Country.
Hold the ball up.
Hill Country MHDD provides early childhood services for 15 rural counties. Their therapists get paid to make in-home visits, sometimes driving more than 2 hours away. And because of the lower rates, in October, they're canceling their contract with the state to serve 375 children.
The state has got to look at this program, or they're going to continue to have providers that are not going to be able to continue with their contracts.
And again, these are services to help children swallow and speak and walk. I mean, these are very important and necessary.
Every Texas House member voted for a bill by Representative Sarah Davis. It would reverse the cuts by using money from the governor's disaster funds. Now she needs to convince the Texas Senate and get Governor Greg Abbott to put it on the special session call.
What my local city councils want to decide on tree ordinances to me pales in comparison to disabled children not having access to medical services.
Until then, therapists like Amanda, mothers like Erica, and children like Reed will have to change their plans.
I don't know, because I can't imagine doing this without it. I can't imagine. It's been the biggest blessing and gift that I could ever imagine receiving.
2 years ago, these cuts started in the Texas Senate. The key people to reversing the cuts are Health and Human Service Chair Charles Schwartner, Finance Chair Jane Nelson, and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. None of them have responded to a request for comment. The governor, however, has. We asked him if he would add this to the special session call.
Oh, absolutely. I've made very clear that there are other items that I will add to the call once the legislature passes all 20 items on the special session agenda.
But fewer than half of the governor's items have passed, and the special session ends Wednesday. Phil Prazen for State of Texas.
Thank you, Phil. The cuts have taken a toll on early childhood intervention programs. Those programs serve more than 50,000 children in Texas. In 2011, the state had 58 organizations providing services. Now that number is down to 47 providers. We checked with the Texas Health and Human Services Commission. They tell us only 3 providers dropped out of the system because of the cuts, and the state found 1 replacement provider to fill some of the void. What happens in the final days of the special session could be influenced by a conversation that happened early in the week. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and Texas House Speaker Joe Straus met privately for the first time since the start of the special session. Patrick said in an email that he and Straus had a productive discussion about a range of issues. He did not specify what they talked about. Tensions between the two GOP leaders have increased over the past few weeks. Patrick leads the Senate, which passed most of the items on the governor's special session call, but only a few of those measures have cleared the House. House members did come together to pass a bill to keep the state's agency for licensing doctors open. Lawmakers failed to pass legislation during the regular session, keeping the Texas Medical Board and several other agencies running. So that was Governor Abbott's first request when he called for the special session. Now, both the House and Senate have passed the critical sunset bill.
We had to ensure that the Medical Practices Act still exists. We had to ensure that doctors are still licensed and relicensed so that new doctors who are moving here can practice their craft here. And then for the purposes for which we've been called, the sunset bills, we're done.
State lawmakers advanced a measure that would require women to have separate insurance coverage for abortions. Plus, a judge dismisses the state's lawsuit over its new anti-sanctuary cities law. Alana Rocha with our news partner, Texas Tribune, has the details.
The Texas Attorney General says he's disappointed a federal judge dismissed the state's lawsuit over the new immigration enforcement law. Ken Paxton filed suit against Travis County and other defendants the day after Governor Abbott signed Senate Bill 4 into law. It was his attempt to preemptively have a court declare it constitutional. SB 4 bans sanctuary cities, the common term for local governments that don't enforce federal immigration laws. It also allows local law enforcement to question the immigration status of people they detain or arrest. It will take effect September 1st unless a judge in a separate case out of San Antonio intervenes. Abortion insurance, a bill that advanced in the legislature this week, would require women pay an additional insurance premium if they want their health plan to cover abortions not considered medical emergencies. House Bill 214 does not include exceptions for instances of fetal abnormalities, rape, or incest. The bill's author, State Representative John Smithy, says opponents of abortion like himself should not have to subsidize the procedure. This week, the Texas House passed a bill to crack down on mail-in ballot fraud. The measure contained an amendment that would undo another law meant to prevent this type of fraud at nursing homes. That law, which passed during the regular session, would have overhauled balloting at nursing homes in an attempt to eliminate manipulation of the residents' votes. But one lawmaker said he was inundated by calls and emails saying the law wasn't practical and would exhaust resources. I'm Alana Rocha. In these final days of the special session, stay up to date at texastribune.org.
For a short time this week, the focus of the Capitol shifted from debate to a tribute to a former Texas governor. We'll show you how Texans are remembering Mark White and why some say he leaves a lasting legacy in the Lone Star State. The bill requiring Texans to use bathrooms based on their gender at birth is stalled in the ledge, but see why it's still having an impact on many young people. After state lawmakers failed to pass the bathroom bill during the regular session, Governor Abbott included it in his list of 20 bills he wants passed during the special session. It would require Texans to use the bathroom in some public buildings based on their gender at birth. The bill has already cleared the Texas Senate, but we told you earlier this week the chairman of the House committee in charge of getting it to the floor may keep the bathroom bill from moving forward. But just the fact that lawmakers are considering the bill could be having an impact. A national LGBTQ suicide hotline reports the number of calls they're receiving from Texas has doubled. As Anna Wernicke reports, many of the calls are coming from young people worried about the bathroom bill.
Trevor Helpline, this is Brian.
Amit Paley says the Trevor Project gets about 200 crisis calls from LGBTQ kids every day.
We're the world's largest suicide prevention and crisis intervention organization for LGBTQ youth.
But last week, he says the phones kept ringing, and most of the calls for help were coming from Texas.
The numbers are heartbreaking, and they speak for themselves.
Paley says the number of calls from Texas teens concerned about the bathroom bill is on the rise.
It sends a message to transgender young people that they are not worthy of respect and that they can be discriminated against. And we know that has a significant impact on their mental health.
Ryan Anderson with the conservative think tank The Heritage Foundation says it's not about safety, it's about privacy of all students.
It's understandable why females in high school wouldn't want boys who identify as girls in their locker room. But likewise, if you're a boy who identifies as a girl, it's understandable why you wouldn't want to be forced into the boys' locker room.
Anderson says when a child's mental health is on the line, it's important that lawmakers here in Washington and in Texas are listening.
We need to find a way to peaceably disagree, to live side by side while disagreeing about something like gender identity.
Anna Warnicki for State of Texas.
The Trevor Project also saw a dramatic spike in calls a few weeks ago following President Donald Trump's tweet banning transgender individuals from serving in the U.S. military. The group says it's releasing the hotline call data now to let lawmakers know the impact they are having on teenagers' health. That bathroom bill is one of many still on the to-do list for Texas lawmakers. Coming up, we'll check the chances for some of the key bills still in limbo in the final days of the special session. And paying tribute to a Texas governor, how Texans are remembering Mark White when we return. Flags flew at half-staff around Texas last week in memory of Mark White. He served as governor from 1983 to 1987. White died last weekend after suffering a heart attack. Some of Texas' biggest names in politics paid tribute to him at his funeral on Wednesday. Former President George W. Bush commended White's dedication to public service.
A governor must bring honor to the office, and that starts by serving something greater than self. Mark did not serve to assuage his ego or advance his social standing. He served to lead the people of Texas to a better future, and his principles were firm.
White is survived by his wife, 3 children, and 9 grandchildren. He was buried Thursday in a private ceremony at the Texas State Cemetery, but first his body was brought to the Capitol to lie in state. KXAN's Wes Rappaport has more on how Texans honored the former governor.
Familiar faces from past and present, near and far, gathered to honor the man who ran Texas from 1983 to 87.
He was just charming. He had so much charisma and so much life to him.
It's easy for those who knew Governor Mark White to think back.
I loved my job working with the White family, and we all have things we have to process and get over, and I will have to live through it, but the best thing I think of is that Mark's work will live on.
His passion for education was something he had in common with former President Lyndon Johnson.
They both shared with all of us that wisdom is something that we can grow into, and let us all be willing to pursue it always.
White had an ability to bring people together, regardless of their party affiliations.
Any public servant spends a lot of time and effort, and Mark White was a good one and served in several roles. And so it's important for folks to be here and recognize that and honor that and show our respect.
Former campaign staffer Donna Beth McCormick remembers the early 80s well.
Here we were with not much money going against Clements, who had been a governor, but everybody worked very hard.
White's death serves as a lesson to many in core values.
He loved this state so much, and he gave it his all. We will remember him as an extraordinary education governor who was willing to do right for Texas children.
Wes Rappaport for State of Texas.
You heard references to former Governor White's stance on education. It's his lasting legacy, but it also brought about his political downfall. White led the push for House Bill 72, which raised teacher pay and reduced class sizes in Texas, but it also required teacher testing and created the no pass, no play policy, which requires athletes to pass their courses. White also backed tax increases to help pay for education reforms, and that was not popular with voters. White lost his bid for re-election in 1986. Some of White's reforms stand to this day. We'll look closer at how his policies are still affecting Texas. Plus, with just 4 days left in the special session, lawmakers still have a lot of work to do. We'll check the outlook for some high-profile pieces of legislation next with our roundtable on State of Texas. The tribute to former Governor Mark White at the Capitol came as lawmakers raced toward the deadline of the special session. And there's a lot of unfinished business. Joining us for perspective, we've got John Mortz from the USA Today Network and Robert Garrett from the Austin Bureau of the Dallas Morning News. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
So tell me a little bit about your relationship with Mark White. You covered him back in the day, right?
Well, he was Attorney General when I was here for the Dallas Times-Herald, and he was aligned with the previous Democratic governor, conservative Dolph Briscoe. Back in that day, the main action at the Capitol was conservative Democrats versus national or liberal Democrats, and there were just a couple of dozen Republicans on the back bench. But Mark White was a very bright lawyer, and he, I think, evolved when he became governor to being, in some ways, more progressive than people expected, and certainly left a legacy on public education.
What's your favorite memory, John, of Mark White?
A story I picked up when I was preparing his obituary. A judge out in El Paso who was appointed to the bench by Governor White mentioned that the education reforms that he championed were kind of unpopular, and it cost him his re-election. One of the aspects of it was requiring teachers to take tests to stay on the job, and he joked that he was the only one who actually lost his job because of teacher testing, because all the other teachers passed just fine.
Right. What is that, you know, lasting impact of what he did with education here in Texas?
Well, the early grade classroom limits, size limits, is a key part of it. It was the Ross Perot Commission, and some of the, you know, the teacher and the beginnings of the exams, the accountability exams. Of course, the most famous thing about HB 72 that came out of the Ross Perot Commission is the no pass, no play, you know, on sports. Yeah, that's become part of the Texas vernacular now, and it's been in place a couple of generations. It's now taken as a given. But back when it went in, there were a lot of football coaches, a lot of football players, a lot of football dads and moms who were quite upset with the new requirements that went in at the time.
Yeah. Does anything that he did back then really have a lasting effect on what's happening at the Capitol today?
Well, one thing you don't see as much of is somebody who's willing to stick his or her neck out on the line and basically challenge the lawmakers to pass it regardless of the consequences, possibly because White paid the ultimate political consequences, being denied a second term.
So we're getting close to the end of this special session. You know, who knows if they're going to get through everything, right? But if they do, does that pave the way for the governor to open up a little bit more room to add something else to the call?
Oh, gee, Josh, I hadn't even thought about that. The big question is whether they pass so little that he calls them back.
Yeah.
I can't forecast what's going to happen. These things are crazy.
Yeah, we're measuring the session in hours to go as opposed to days or weeks to go right now. Adding to this particular call would be quite a long shot, I would think.
There are some pieces of legislation there, like the HB 25 for funding for therapy for children with special needs. People are really hoping that goes through, so if we are in a second special session, maybe they'll have a better chance, right?
Potentially, but you got some roadblocks on that one in the Senate. The Senate, they have pride of authorship on that thing. They're still not persuaded that what they did back in 2015 has created harm. So until that happens, I don't see Greg Abbott touching it.
Yeah, one of the things that Governor Abbott didn't do this time was make sure that he had consensus for most of his controversial bills before calling them back. From what I'm hearing, a lot of people, in the lobby and in the chamber say, if we have an agreement, call us back then, but don't just call us back for 30 days of another food fight on the chamber floors.
We saw some actual speaking in person between Lieutenant Governor Patrick and Speaker Strauss this past week. What is
Were
that?
you in the room?
No. We were told that.
Okay.
What does that say about possibly mending that relationship? A lot of people have felt some strife there.
I don't think it says much. I think Patrick made a big deal that they hadn't had any meetings, and so they had a meeting, and I think there was some incremental movement afterward on a few bills moving forward. I guess the most notable thing is what property tax seems to be moving, could pass. That seems to be Greg Abbott's I've got to have this subject.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing too. If property tax does not pass, that would most likely trigger the special session. I think the issues that divide the two top legislative leaders, whether it's bathroom bills and some of the other wedge issues, I think they're still there.
Oh yeah, and even on substantive non-hot button issues like school finance, that appears to be kind of at a stalemate, even though the principals on that in both chambers are supposedly still talking as we speak.
For the everyday Texan, I mean, what does it matter if the two leaders of the two chambers get along?
Well, the Republican Party, like in Washington, here in Austin, they own the machinery, and if services and stuff don't get done, then it matters that these guys can't see past the next primary and trying to get rid of the other guy. So I think it's important, particularly in education.
Yeah, and just on a political matter, the opposition is so fragmented and so disorganized, and by that I mean the Texas Democratic Party, that even a colossal failure might not exact a political price for any of the top leaders.
Yeah, that was actually my last question. What's the Democratic Party going to do coming up for the next gubernatorial election?
They have a candidate for lieutenant governor, but not governor. I think it's it's beyond disorganization. It's with Donald Trump in the White House, you would think even in the reddest of states someone would find a candidate.
Yeah, I mean they're down to the point where they can't even run on principle if they have no one to carry a principled message. So,
what are we going to talk about then?
We're going to talk about all those House Republican primaries in the Texas legislature. There'll be a lot of them.
And we might see if Beto O'Rourke catches fire against Ted Cruz.
Right. Well, a lot of stuff to talk about, I guess. We'll have you back, right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Look forward to it.
Enjoyed these last couple of days of the special session. We'll see you back for the next one, right?
Appreciate it.
All right, and thank you again for joining us for State of Texas. Stay tuned for Meet the Press coming up at 9. I'm Josh Hinkle. Have a great day.